Next, we move to the next set of players in our business drama, and that is the shareholders. The shareholders have many rights, of course, because really they own the company. Anybody can be a shareholder. It could be an individual investor. So if you're listening to this, you very well may be a shareholder of various companies. You could have private pension funds, state pension funds, 401ks, things like that, mutual funds, which essentially are professional companies that invest in various companies with many investors' money. Instead of investing yourself, you invest with a mutual fund, and the mutual fund manager decides which stocks to put all the money in. They could be other companies, could be employees of the company who are very often given stock or options in the company. These different investors, of course, each have their own unique set of concerns. However, the overall goal is, of course, to do what's best for the company in terms of the bottom line, in terms of the profit. They have to assert their individual voices to make their goals to make their goals have the best chance of being met. Now, of course, shareholders get to vote on some key decisions, including electing the directors and deciding whether to merge, that sort of thing. So, the shareholders, aside from what they do, they also have rights. They elect single directors. That can be done in a single slate of directors sometimes, which means let's say there are 9 directors. They could all be elected in a single year. Or there could be a staggered board. For example, you could have 9 members on the board, but 3 elected each year every 3 years, almost like United States senators. They also approve or disapprove of fundamental changes. If the company wants to merge or the company wants to dissolve, the shareholders have to approve that. And they also have the right to vote at annual meetings on these sorts of questions, on these fundamental questions. And they are based on the record date. For example, if the annual meeting is on June 1st, well, in order to decrease confusion, let's say they'll say the record date is May 15th, so 2 weeks early. If you're a shareholder on May 15th, you get to vote, otherwise you don't. It would just be too complicated if you got your shares on May 31st and then to vote on June 1st. It would be virtually impossible to keep track of who has the ability to actually vote. Now, of course, a shareholder can actually come to the meeting, can come to the annual meeting and vote physically while there, but most shareholders in a publicly held company are not actually going to come to the meeting. Many, like if I'm a shareholder of Google, I'm not going to fly out to San Francisco or Mountaindale or whatever it is and vote in the Google annual meeting. I just don't have time, and most shareholders are the same way. So instead, what shareholders can do is they can give somebody the authority to vote their shares, and that is called a proxy. So a proxy is an authorization given by the shareholders to a third party to vote that shareholder's place. The person who's being appointed is also sometimes known as a proxy. In other words, I give a proxy to my proxy, and the proxy can then go ahead and vote whatever my shares are. Very often you'll have proxy solicitations. You'll get things in the mail, and the mail will say, we'd like you to vote this particular director. If you agree, then send in this form, and the form is a proxy form. It gives somebody the authority to vote your shares in a particular way. A proxy has the name of the shareholder, what the authorized vote is. It could be yes or no to an issue, or it could be unlimited discretion. In other words, you can give somebody the proxy saying you can vote whatever you like, or with my shares, or you can give somebody a proxy saying you can vote, but only if it's yes to question C. Proxies are the default rule is that the proxies are good for 11 months to cover only one annual meeting, although they don't have to be that way. It could be longer or shorter depending on what it says. Proxies are usually fully revocable, which means if you change your mind, if you give your proxy to somebody, the meeting is on June 1st, and you give your proxy to somebody on May 1st, and now it's May 15th and you change your mind, you can revoke your proxy. There are a couple of exceptions. Number one, if they're coupled with an interest, which means there's consideration. I gave my right to vote in exchange. Somebody paid me for my right to vote. Well, if somebody pays me for my right to vote, then it's a contract, and a contract can't simply be withdrawn just like that. Also, there could be a voting contract that can be specifically enforced. There also could be a voting trust, where a bunch of people, rather than having to worry about proxies, and rather than having to worry about voting individually, they all pool their shares. So now they've got a block of, let's say, 100,000 shares that they can vote, and this is a way to gain more influence, rather than having one person with 10 shares, which just doesn't matter that much. But all of a sudden, if this voting trust controls 100,000 shares, then all of a sudden its vote could mean a lot bigger. It could make a much bigger difference. Okay, why do shareholders own money? Well, the reason, of course, why do they own shares of the company? And the answer is because they want money. They want to get money from the company. And how do they get money from the company? Well, the first and most common way they do so is by getting dividends. The board of directors declares how much will be given on a per share basis. For example, if there are a million shares and the company makes $2 million of profits, well, the board can say, okay, we're taking that $2 million and giving it out to our shareholders, and therefore every person gets $2 per share. Or they can say, we made $2 million, we're going to keep $1 million in the company for future projects, but we're going to take the other million and give it out to our shareholders, and then the shareholders get $1 per share. So, in other words, the board of directors decides when and how much to give as dividends to the shareholders. Of course, the board of directors wants to give more money to the shareholders because, well, it's the shareholders' money, but also because the shareholders will like them and more likely to vote for them. On the other hand, the board of directors might want to keep the money and for a rainy day, or keep the money in case they need it for whatever reason, or to start new projects. And so, therefore, of course, the board of directors don't get to keep it personally. It would be in the corporate bank accounts. So this is just one of the decisions that directors have to make. Shareholders can also get money through a share repurchase plan, which gives options to shareholders to sell their shares back to the company. They don't have to have one of these, but sometimes companies want to consolidate a little bit, decrease the number of shares that are floating. So they might announce saying anybody that wants to sell the stock back to the company, will pay you $50 per share. And if they do that, and stockholders do that, well then of course they give up their shares and they get the money. There can also be a dissolution dividend, which means if the company goes out of business and there's money sitting there that's left after all the creditors are paid, well then that money, whatever's left over, is given to the shareholders because the shareholders are the ones that actually own the company. And finally, you have distribution of corporate property. If the company has, if it's a small company, usually this is relevant to, and the company goes out of business or the company stops operating for whatever reason, and it's got a desk, and it's got file cabinets, and it's got physical plant, inventory, whatever it is, that's distributed proportionally among the shareholders as well.